My grandmother had an easy life growing up in Smyrna until one day in 1922, when she was vacationing with her family at a seaside resort, news came of the invasion, which became the genocide of the Greek-speaking Christian minority. Her parents and their 5 children, in their beach clothes, grabbed their beach chairs, jumped on a small boat to the island of Chios, and camped out in a park where they slept on beach chairs until they were able to make their way to Athens. So at the age of 14, my grandmother became a refugee. But just 3 years later, thanks to a scholarship, she was on her way on an ocean liner to the United States to study at Wellesley College, and so her fate had turned. The word crisis comes from the Greek and implies a decision. When something bad happens, we have the choice between looking back at all that was lost or looking forward at all that could be gained. Change often brings unwelcome outcome, but it can also bring opportunity, however non-obvious, in that moment of despair. Greece, as you know, has suffered immeasurably over the last decade. It all started in 2008 during the debt crisis and austerity, which led to a shrinking of the Greek economy to about half its size and the loss of 1 million jobs, which has led to peak unemployment of 58%, which continues to be very high today. So how do you create jobs? Well, let's look at the United States. All of the net new jobs in the American economy come from startups less than 5 years old. That's 1.5 million new jobs every year that come from startups. These are not necessarily small companies, they are young companies. So what this says is that the way to create jobs in Greece is to create more startups. But is this a realistic aspiration? Yes, it is. Greeks are natural entrepreneurs. Of the Greek immigrants in the US labor force, 16% are small business owners. That is the highest of any immigrant group. And beyond pizzerias and diners, Greeks have started large businesses like Huffington Post, Boston Scientific, and Biogen. So this is the Greeks in the United States, but what about the Greeks in Greece? The Greek economy is dominated by small and medium enterprises with less than 250 employees. These employ 88% of the Greek labor force, and actually a quarter of the Greek labor force is self-employed. So this would infer that the way to grow startups in Greece is, number one, to create more startups, and number two, to help small businesses to grow. My interest in entrepreneurship began actually during a trip to Israel, which we all know is a startup nation. I was struck by the similarities in culture between Israel and Greece. Greece, like Israel, has a scrappy culture full of talent, tenacity, assertiveness, and critical independent thinking. Greeks do not need rules to follow. They're very comfortable thinking out of the box, as we all know from political discussions at dinner. So Israel remains a model for Greece, and Greece should continue to drive forward its R&D as well as its college graduation rates, because at the core of every startup ecosystem is a strong university system, which creates innovative research as well as well-educated young talent. So college education has increased dramatically over the last decade in Greece. And Greece is actually second in the world for the proportionate number of academics that it exports to top US universities. And it also remains at the top of citations per publication in high-impact journals. So all of this is really impressive, and it sounds great for research, but it hasn't really translated to entrepreneurship. And I think I can explain why, and I'm going to give you a personal example. My father immigrated from Greece to the United States in 1948 in order to study at MIT and then become a professor of thermodynamics at MIT. And during that same time, he started a business which is now called Thermo Fisher and currently employs 70,000 people. But the funny part about his story is that his parents wanted him to become a professor at Athens Polytechnic, and they were disappointed. They viewed entrepreneurship as being intellectually inferior. So this is a mentality that has existed in Greece, but thankfully it's starting to change. Greece hit rock bottom in 2015 when the people voted to reject the proposed European bailout of its government debt. This was a dark moment in Greek history. My friends in Greece were devastated. It felt like the end of Greece was near and that Greece might exit the euro. But in the midst of this despair, I entered an auditorium at the Mokritos Research Center in Athens, and it was like an alternate universe. There, the finalists of the MIT Enterprise Forum Greece Startup Competition were pitching their startups and their visions for the future. The room was spellbound, filled with hope and optimism. In the midst of the crisis, these entrepreneurs were moving forward instead of waiting for someone else to solve their problems. It should be noted that some of the challenges facing Greece actually enforce the fundamentals of a strong startup. So first of all, limited capital means that there's heavy use of equity compensation and a drive toward customers, revenues, and profitability. Second, a small local market requires English fluency and an eye on globalization. And most importantly, is high unemployment means that there's ready access to talent, which is the most important part of having a successful startup. So within the midst of the crisis, a very healthy startup ecosystem started to grow. There were incubators, accelerators, conferences, competitions, and co-working spaces. These are in areas like agriculture, food, IT, tourism, and logistics. And what's cool about technology is that it's made it possible to start up a business with less capital than historically possible before. But in addition to that, the European Investment Fund has made available 300 million euros for investment in Greece. In addition, the new government has also been helping things out by working on lowering bureaucracy, lowering taxes, fueling exports and foreign direct investment, and most importantly, reforming bankruptcy law because failure is a part of entrepreneurship. One of the challenges faced by entrepreneurs in Greece is their distance from startup hubs like that in Silicon Valley, New York, or Boston that are full of investors, mentors, advisors, customers, suppliers, other entrepreneurs, as well as large enterprise, which invests in startups and buys product from them. So we've created a group that meets every month at the Greek consulate in Boston, and we organize events twice per year in Boston to have startups from Greece come and pitch to our local Boston tech ecosystem. So this educates us about what's happening in Greece, and it allows those entrepreneurs to get access to this very well-developed network that we've built there. We also have a platform for virtual connections that we're just launching now. And we have a CEO group that's been meeting monthly in order to exchange information and help each other out. So this is all great. Creating startups will create jobs. It will help the budget and trade accounts of Greece. But that's not the end of Greece's economic issues, because the largest source of public expenditure in Greece is its pension and healthcare system. And nearly half of Greeks claim pensions as their dominant source of income. But while these expenses have been growing, the labor force in Greece has been shrinking due to Greeks leaving during the crisis, a low birth rate, and one of the highest life expectancies in the world. So Greece has been left with the highest rate of old age economic dependence in all of Europe at 63%. What Greece needs is more people to be working and paying into the pension and healthcare system. Since the crisis began, 500,000 Greeks have left the country, most of them with college and postgraduate degrees. But while people who leave other countries may never want to return, many Greeks would be happy to return under the right economic conditions with true opportunity and meritocracy. Greece 2.0 could reverse the brain drain and bring back Greeks, and would be all the better for having brought back people with experience outside of the country that can bring specific skill sets that are currently missing in Greece. So not just bodies to pay into the system, but actual expertise. To incentivize Greeks to return, a new program called Rebrain Greece is providing select recruits 2 years of guaranteed employment, which is partly funded by the state. But in addition to its economic issues and its aging population, Greece, as we all know, has had to deal with the refugees coming in from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Congo, and other areas. Last year, 74,000 refugees entered Greece, and there are currently about 109,000 refugees living in Greece, which is about 1% of the Greek population. I know this is a difficult topic and one that has been getting a lot of coverage lately. I don't know how many refugees belong in Greece. That's a very complex question and one that I can't speak to. I certainly don't believe in open borders. But what I want to talk about is, what do you do with however many refugees remain in Greece? Refugees are commonly seen as a burden and an expense, competing for local resources like housing, schools, and jobs. But are they necessarily a long-term drain on the economy? Obviously, there are substantive differences between the United States and Greece, our economies, our immigrant populations, and our immigration history. But I would like to share some information about the United States. Immigrants make up nearly 30% of all new entrepreneurs in the United States. In fact, over half of the billion-dollar startups in the United States have at least one immigrant founder. These are companies that you all know: Yahoo, Google, Uber, Intel, Tesla. The value of these companies collectively is $248 billion, and they create on average 1,200 jobs per company. So that's immigrants. But what about refugees, people who had to flee their home country and are seeking political asylum? Well, of the immigrant entrepreneurs of billion-dollar companies that I just mentioned, 1/3 came to the United States as a refugee. In fact, 13% of refugees in the United States are entrepreneurs, as opposed to just 11.5% of immigrants in general, and just 9% of the native-born. I don't want to minimize the impact of trauma on this population or the significant time it takes to get these people on their feet. I simply want to point out the fact that in the United States, over the long term, refugees are creating many, many jobs. They're generating billions of dollars of taxable revenue. They are not taking a slice out of the pie, they are enlarging the pie. So, how do we fuel startups? First is global training and mentorship through incubators and accelerators, both in Greece and abroad, with a particular focus on translational technology research coming out of the research centers and universities. These take longer to develop, but they have the highest potential. The second is access to global networks, such as the one we're creating in Boston. And there are others too. There are some in New York and California. And finally, growth capital. So beyond the seed capital that's been made available, as these companies begin to grow, they will need larger amounts of capital to move forward. My advice to Greek entrepreneurs, as my advice to all entrepreneurs, is particularly for engineers and technologists, get out of the lab and speak with customers. Every single day, try to speak with a customer and listen to what they're saying to you. Number 2, build a strong team and empower your team. Number 3, create urgency because somebody right behind you in Singapore or Bangalore is working really hard, they're very well educated, and they're hungry. And finally, number 4, it's okay to fail. Failure is information. You need to learn from it and move forward. So in conclusion, Greece needs jobs, and the best way to create jobs is to create startups. These don't need to be billion-dollar unicorns. Most companies are not unicorns, but they can still generate a strong return for their investors and for their founders. They can create jobs, and they can create social impact. Greeks have always thrived in academia, research, and entrepreneurship outside of Greece. It's time for Greeks to thrive inside the country as well. Am I an outsider, completely out of touch with reality in Greece? If you've ever been involved in a construction project and you've been woken up every morning to hammers pounding, the walls coming down, dust in your eyes, you're going to view things a certain way. But if you come in off the street after the demolition is done, what you see is a bright open space full of possibility. And that's how I see Greece, full of possibility. Is this the crazy ranting of an idealist? Yes. I am an optimist. Of course I am. I'm an entrepreneur. So to finish the story about my grandmother, she ended up graduating from Wellesley College, and she returned to Greece to teach biology at Athens College. And around the same time, another crisis befell her, which was her beloved brother died, leaving behind his wife and an infant for whom my grandmother felt responsible. And about that same time, her friends from America were asking if there were any programs in Greece where they could send their children to come and study. So my grandmother saw an opening for financial freedom and a way to provide a livelihood for her sister-in-law. So she started a program called College Year in Athens, and thus became an entrepreneur. My yaya never viewed herself as a victim. From the ashes of every crisis which befell her, she discovered opportunity. My yaya was a woman who studied and taught STEM. She was a refugee. She was the brain drain. She was the rebrain. And finally, my yaya was an entrepreneur. If all of this was possible to a baby girl born in 1907, then surely it's possible again today in Greece 2.0. Thank you.